Moving ahead on our discussions and knowledge about the various rules under Indian DPDP Act, we are now going to talk about a data processor. The video might appear to be a bit longer because I am going to touch base on the terminologies first and then come on to the exact role of a data processor. Welcome to my YouTube channel where you daily see new content on data privacy, and as I mentioned, in this video we are going to talk about the role of a data processor under the Indian DPDP Act 2023. So we start with the basic terminology. What is personal data? Personal data is a piece of information or a set of pieces of information that combine and establish identity of an individual. His name, which is not unique, so a combination of name with address, phone number, email ID is personal data. His banking details, his genetics, his biometrics, his healthcare, his religious practices, they are all personal to him, right? So there is personal data. And any part of personal data which, if lost, can harm him is also known as, or is categorized as, sensitive personal data, and the privacy laws therefore say that they are to be processed with more care and stored with more care. The Indian DPDP Act also defines processing of data, and there are 5 processes in processing of data: collecting personal data, storing personal data, using someone's personal data, disclosing or sharing it with a third party, and finally destroying personal data. So if your organization does any of these 5 activities with personal data of anyone, which you would actually do with at least your employees, then you are liable to comply with the Indian DPDP Act, looking at the other conditions as well. The process of processing the data should be specific, explicit, and be extremely legitimate. Now, other terminologies include who is the data principal. The person, the individual whose personal data has been collected and processed, is the data principal. If the child less than 18 years old, then you need the parent or the guardian along. Even the traditional bank account is under guardianship. If the disabled person, then you need the lawful guardian around, because then he is the one who is going to take on behalf of the disabled person, right? So that is the definition of data principal. And then we have data fiduciary, the organization that decides how is the information going to be processed, right? So the 5 processes that we talked of in the a couple of minutes back, how would that happen for a given process is what the data fiduciary is to decide. So how is it going to be collected, stored, used or processed, disclosed or shared with a third party, and finally destroyed. And there's not only how, but why and when. What is the purpose of each of them is something that a fiduciary decides. Depending on how big or how small an organization is, the fiduciary is also termed as significant data fiduciary. So it's a large organization, and banking is one of my favorite examples. A bank would actually be a significant data fiduciary because A, they have a lot of customers, B, they have a lot of processes, right? So there have to be multiple people reporting into a significant data fiduciary, or in other words, a data protection officer. We talked about it in the previous video. A central data protection officer, or maybe multiple smaller data protection officers reporting into him for various privacy related processes. Then we come on to data processor. Now what is this data processor? Data processor is the organization who is actually processing the information, following the guidelines of fiduciary. Fiduciary has decided what is to be done, how and why. And processor is the one who is executing the instructions of the fiduciary, and we will talk about their roles in this video. The other important thing is, in the Indian DPDP Act, there is a consent manager. Consent manager, the person who is responsible for obtaining consent from the principal for processing the data. It's consent manager who is to decide or who is to formulate the methods of taking the consent, and our next video is going to be about the role of a consent manager. Now let's come on to the role of a data processor. So a data processor has key responsibilities. First of all, he has to process the information. So he has to process the information on behalf of the fiduciary. Therefore, he is required to align with the purpose that the fiduciary has defined and follow all the documented instructions that the fiduciary has given. This would include collecting, this would include processing, storing, destroying, and maybe third-party sharing as well, right? And fiduciary would define all these, and the processor is the one who is going to follow them and do them. Data security measures is because the data is in custody of the processor has to be careful about the security measures that have to be in line with the fiduciary's requirement, with the data protection guidelines. So both the documentation on the administrative controls as well as the technical controls, which is confidentiality, integrity and availability, both need to be done by data processor because he is controlling the data. And then he is supposed to assist fiduciary with the data subject requests. We have done a series of videos which talks about the rights of a data subject. So it's the data fiduciary who gets those requests as per any of those rights, and he of course has to collect that information or take an action in line with data processor. Actually, data processor has to take those actions in compliance with what fiduciary has received or what fiduciary wants them to do. Moving on, record keeping is a very important thing. Any process, anything, record keeping is most important. So record keeping and documentation is important. You should document all the security measures as well. If there's a new thing that you are introducing, if there's something that has gone wrong, which is breach notification, which comes under your compliance and accountability, it's the job of the data processor. He is responsible. Fiduciary is also responsible, right? But they need to be together, working together hand in hand, right? So processor is the one who has to make sure that he's accountable with his own data handling practices and is in compliance with the DPDP Act 2023 and establishes a very strong relationship with the fiduciary because everything is going to be hand in hand. There need to be very good contracts, penalties, because the data protection board on breach can put in penalties. What would happen to the reputation if a breach is there? So all those things need to be very well documented, and very good strong relationship is expected to be between the data fiduciary and data processor. So that's about the roles and responsibilities of data processor. I hope you like the content of my video. Please press the bell and the like icon. Stay subscribed as we will continue with the details on the role of a consent manager in the video tomorrow, and share your feedback in the comment section. Thank you.